arise from future litigation, historical pollution, and liability risks associated with this transaction. The approval of these shares transfers has been challenged in Nigerian courts for the failure to comply with Nigerian law. It's an ongoing case that is on the court and is going to be heard later this month. So we would like to know about the Shell compliance with the Nigerian law, international human rights law, and the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, known as EITI, which you are part of the board. Prior to the investment, Shell would have been required to conduct environmental evaluation studies under Part 1, Regulation 8 of the Upstream Petroleum Environmental Regulation from 2022. Were these studies submitted to the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Resource Commission, the UNPRC, the regulatory authority? Will Shell publish these studies to ease our concerns as shareholders? And also, what other due diligence did Shell undertake prior to the sale of the SPDC shares to guarantee that Renaissance had the proper technical and financial capacity to undertake the pollution remediation and the assets decommissioning obligations in order to comply with the Nigerian law, international human rights law, and the EITI standards? Finally, will Shell release the report from the S&P Global that was provided to the NUPRC before their decision to refuse the sale as required under the EITI? Again, if you don't have time to answer or if you need some more details, we'll be very happy to have your written response and also follow-up meeting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pereira, for your question. I'll pass again, as in the last case, or the last but one case, to my colleagues to see if there's more that they might want to add now, or we'll get back to you in written form. I just, couple of points just to keep reiterating. The company in whom we had a stake was called SPDC. Mm-hmm. That company remains, and so the skills that company had while Shell owned a stake are still there to do all the things you're asking us rightly to do. But I can also assure you that the board spent a lot of time on this transaction, many meetings, many special meetings, and many of their questions were very much of the nature of the questions that you're asking us, to satisfy ourselves that in the new arrangement with Renaissance taking over our shares, that the work of Shell that you would have expected would be continued. And we were satisfied, and so we approved the deal. Maybe other things we may get back to you in writing, but anything you want to do now, either Will or Sinead?
A couple of points, maybe, if I may. I think, firstly, let me assure you and our shareholders, the rigor with which this transaction was conducted was second to none. We had external counsels all through to be able to give us assurance. Of course, you can imagine our own concerns around multiple elements of this transaction. So we had extensive due diligence. This is a transaction that has been taking place over years, one of the longest transactions that we have been engaged in. We had external counsel to be able to continue to provide assurance to us. We brought experts that had worked in areas, for example, ethics and compliance in other major companies to be able to challenge our thinking and continue to push us in that direction. We engaged with multiple stakeholders through the process. A core part of the transaction was to be able to assure ourselves that the remaining entity was going to be a self-functioning entity. And remember, the people who are there were the same people that worked in SPDC JV when we had an equity interest in it. Those people haven't changed. So from a capability perspective, a core part of the deal was to retain that knowledge, that experience, and those are some of the best people we have in the company. Interestingly, the third largest expat group within Shell is Nigerian expats because of the capability that we have been able to develop in that joint venture for a very, very, very long time. What I would say is, we have been sharing everything with NUPRC, of course. We have had multiple discussions, including, for example, disagreements on process, which is what we ended up overcoming. This is, as Sinead has already mentioned, a deal that is bound by confidentiality. Ultimately, it is going to be down to the owners of SPDC joint venture, including Renaissance, to decide exactly what they disclose and what they don't. But we have very high confidence in the transaction and the sanctity of the transaction on behalf of our shareholders.